Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Sunday morning class. And being that tonight is the first night of Chanukah, and we're going to change the topic of the class. Instead of learning our regular Tanya that we do every Sunday morning, we will talk today about the holiday, extraordinary holiday of Chanukah coming up tonight. So welcome. The story of Chanukah, I'm sure most of you or all of you probably know the basics of it, but I'll go through it anyway just quickly. The story of Chanukah happens in about 165 years BCE. So that would be, we're in 2019, add 165 is 2119, but 2190 and 86 years. Okay? Yeah. And that happens during the Second Temple era. While the Second Temple is standing is in Jerusalem, the Jewish people have some independence, they have even kings, they have their own sovereignty. But it's at this time that the Greeks how do I have to disable that? How do I do that? Okay. It's at this time that we'll back up a little bit. Alexander the Great, who was the ruler of Greece and who basically conquered most of the world, was a friendly king to the Jewish people. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but the Jewish name Alexander comes from Alexander the Great. They made a deal with him that they would, if he treated them well, so that they would honor him. That 1 year that they made this deal, all Jewish kids would be called Alexander. And that's how the name Alexander became a Jewish name in the Jewish Bayas. But after Alexander, things changed, and Greece became hostile to the Jewish people, and they began to spread their philosophy, the Hellenist philosophy, which is secularism, and they put a great emphasis and a great premium on human intelligence, and that's the highest form of the highest you can reach is to have the ultimate knowledge and to reach perfection in intelligence. That which was beyond intelligence didn't talk to the Greeks. And this began to spread, and it began to spread among the Jewish people also. It infiltrated the Jewish people very, very much. And many Jews became Hellenists and left the fold, as they say. And eventually the Greeks said we had enough of Judaism, and they outlawed Jewish practice in many cases. You weren't allowed to keep Shabbos, you weren't allowed to circumcise your sons, you couldn't learn Torah, you could learn many different things that they forbade. And the Jews were not going to have any of that, of course, and they stood up against it. And a man by the name of Yehuda, which was the family of the Maccabees, he gathered a small group of Jews, which later became a little more, but they never numbered in the tens of thousands. It was a small army of Jews that rose up against the Greeks, and eventually this was an all-out war, because when the Jews weren't giving in to the demands of the Greeks, they went to war against the Jews physically to destroy them and to take over Israel and get rid of the Jewish people. And they had their sights on the temple. The Greeks had their sights on the temple not to destroy the temple, but to take it over. And as I said, the Jews saw this as a great affront, and they went to war against the Greeks, and it turned out to the all-out war, which the Jews won miraculously. It was a very hard battle, And the Greek army was no one, you couldn't match the Greek army, certainly not at the time. They were the greatest force, and the Jews were, compared to the Greeks, they were like a fly on an elephant. You know what I'm saying? It was a joke. And I say elephant, they fought, then they used elephants in warfare. But eventually the Jews won the war on the 24th, today, the 24th of the month of Kislev, was the day that the battle was decided in favor of the Jewish people, the Maccabees and the Hashmonaim, the Hasmoneans. And the Jews came into the temple to rededicate it because the Greeks had defiled and ransacked it and brought an end to the service of the temple. And the Jews came back to dedicate it and to restore everything there. And the famous story goes that they looked for pure oil to light up the menorah in the temple, and they couldn't find any uncontaminated oil. And they couldn't find any uncontaminated oil. So interestingly enough, the law okays using contaminated oil if you don't have any other. That's the truth. But the Jews decided that they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that the oil that they use will be pure oil. And they looked and searched and they couldn't find any. All the oil in the temple was not destroyed but contaminated by the Greeks. It was open, and they realized that the Greeks had touched it and tampered with it, and which renders it impure. Until eventually they found one little vial of oil, one little bottle cruse of oil, which they were able to ascertain that it was not touched by the Greeks because it had a double seal. It had the seal of the high priest, which they saw wasn't, undone, wasn't broken. And as a result, they had pure oil. So it was a wonderful, joyous occasion that they found this one jug of oil. And the problem was that this jug of oil was only enough to light the menorah. It would have been able to light it up for one day. Within a day, they would run out of oil. Now, how long does it take to produce new oil? You have to go get the olives, crush them, produce them. It takes time. How long? It takes a week, 8 days to be exact. So what happened was, God provided a miracle in the temple that one day supply of oil kept burning for 8 days until the Jews had time to produce new oil and bring it to the temple and have whatever, an unlimited amount. A year later, the rabbis who recognized this extraordinary, important miracle instituted that the Chanukah celebration and the holiday should be observed by Jews all over the world for 8 days to commemorate that wonderful miracle that took place with the oil. And that's why, as tradition has it, we do other things with the oil as well. We fry latkes, we fry donuts, whatever it is. We use oil. It's an oil holiday. Now, this is quite interesting. On a number of accounts. I mean, that's basically the story. I'm sure that I wasn't telling you anything new that you didn't know. The big question, of course, is, what was this war all about? What did the Greeks want from the Jews? Why were they against Judaism? What did they have against us? Today that sounds like a silly question. What do you mean, what I do? Everyone has against us, right? No one likes us. So then it was the Greeks. Tomorrow it's the Romans. Yeah, it was after that was the Romans. It was Egypt, Greece, Haman. I mean, what kind of a question is that? But it is a question because the Greeks weren't foolish people. They were very far from stupid. They had a very sophisticated culture. And they were very smart. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, they put a very high premium on intelligence. So if anything, you would say that these are intelligent people. To them, they worshipped intelligence. The intelligence, the highest you can reach is the more you know, the more you... So what was it about Judaism that they did not like? What did they kill? What is it? So Haman, the story of Purim, we know. He hated the Jews like Hitler hated the Jews. He wanted to kill all Jews, and that's what he set out to do, and we won. Thank God the miracle happened there, we have Purim. The Greeks were not looking to kill all the Jews. We find nowhere that the Greeks had a plan to annihilate the Jewish people, the final solution. We don't have that in our history books. That's not part of the Greek program.
Not physically.
Not physically at all. They didn't have a problem. So what was their war? How did this turn into an all-out war, and why? What was the basis of it? Question number 2. We have 2 miracles on Chanukah, right? What are the 2 miracles that we commemorate on Chanukah?
The lighting of the menorah.
The oil, correct. And what is the other miracle? The other miracle? That the Maccabees beat the Greeks. There was a tiny little army that overpowered this massive. Imagine if there was a war today between the Jewish people and the United States. I mean, maybe today it wouldn't be such a big whatever because Israel is so sophisticated. But then they were outnumbered, vastly outnumbered. So that in itself was a great miracle. Yet, what the interesting thing is now, furthermore, the miracle of the war was witnessed by everyone. Everyone knew there was an all-out war. Everyone participated in it. Everyone knew the danger, and everyone was able to observe the great miracle that happened in the victory against the Greeks. How many people were aware of the miracle with the oil in the inner sanctuary of the temple? Who saw that miracle? 20 people. The Kohanim. The Kohanim saw it, the high priest and a few Kohanim that were inside the inner sanctuary where the menorah was placed. How many people walked in there to even be able to observe that miracle? Think about it. The menorah was stationed not in the most inside room of the temple, but the second chamber, where only Kohanim are allowed to go in, and even the Kohanim don't go in there just freely. You know, if you're nothing to do there, you're not going in there. The altar wasn't even in there. The altar was in the third section. So you can say the sacrifices was a little busier because people brought sacrifices, but the menorah was further in. So the average Kohen didn't even see the menorah. One Kohen went in every day to light it, which was the high priest. And maybe another priest that went in there to do a little other things, but that was it. So how many people saw the menorah, the miracle of the oil? A handful. Literally a handful of people knew about it. No one saw it. Yet, when you actually look today, 2,100 years later, 2,200 years later, or 200 years later, or 2 years later after the miracle, what was the big story of Chanukah? Lighting menorah. That's what we emphasize. That's the miracle of the day. That's literally the only miracle that we celebrate is the miracle of the oil. The miracle that no one even saw. The big miracle that everyone was aware of, that everyone was quite, that it was a shocking miracle. It touched everyone. How many people were worried about the menorah and how many people were worried about the war? Your average person didn't know what was going on in the temple. He wasn't there. If they wouldn't have the menorah for 8 days, it wouldn't have changed his life much. But if they wouldn't win the war against the Greeks, life would have changed drastically. They would all be dead, or exiled, or taken as slaves. This is a much more significant miracle to celebrate and to commemorate and to thank God for. And as I said, had the miracle of the oil not happened, they would have used the non-kosher oil or the non-pure oil. So the whole thing makes no sense. We're celebrating and commemorating and emphasizing so much. We're using the oil in every aspect of our life, in latkes, donuts, menorah, everything, to commemorate a miracle that didn't even have to happen when you think about it. Because they could have used the non-pure oil. When you have no choice, that's what you use. The halacha, the law allows you to use the non-kosher oil. So we're commemorating 2,000 years later a miracle that really didn't even have to happen, and the miracle that did have to happen, and did happen, thank God. And we won this big battle. No, not over. Most people don't even know that there was such a miracle that happened. It's like it's totally forgotten. To put this in perspective, you remember the 6-Day War? Imagine the 6-Day War. You have 6 armies against the Jewish people.
That was a miracle, Rabbi.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
You remember it?
So was the 73.
73 was, but it wasn't as glorious because so many soldiers died in 73.
There's no comparison.
You can't compare it. And the fear that had engulfed the Jewish people all over the world before the 6-Day War, they were foreseeing another Holocaust, God forbid, 19 years, 20 years, 30 years, 25 years after the Holocaust. It was going to happen all over again.
You know
The fear that was in
Rabbi, you know what's amazing about that war? And I remember that war, that how the Jewish people all over the world united. In that 60
That's exactly right.
And how the amount of money that they
That's
raised
exactly right.
was
Not only raised, Jews volunteered to go to Israel to go fight. It was a tremendous moment, but there was great fear. Now imagine, you win the war in the 6 days. Yeah, the Jewish people are victorious in the way they did. In the 6 days, they got all the territories. They expanded Israel 5 times as big. They got back Jerusalem. They got back the West Bank. They got back Sinai. They got back the Golan. They got all this. And they got saved. That's the main thing. They weren't thrown into the sea. And then, after the war is over, they go into the main synagogue in Jerusalem and they find that the Torah was intact, that the Torahs weren't thrown around. Well, let's say, something like that. And a year later, the Jewish people who want to commemorate the 6-Day War, what's the big celebration? That when we came into the main synagogue in Jerusalem, we didn't find Torahs on the floor, which would have been terrible if we did. Or even worse. The same thing, like we were able to light up the candles in the synagogue, something like that. And that becomes the whole celebration of every June since then for thousands of years. And people, you can imagine, thousands of years later, no one even remembers that there was a 6-Day War. The whole celebration becomes about the candle. We lit up the candle, the great synagogue of Jerusalem. I mean, are you kidding me? That's what we're going to emphasize, rather than emphasize the miracle of the war itself. Yet, here we are tonight. I can guarantee you that most of you are going to be doing one thing only, lighting Hanukkah candles, and if you have a wonderful wife, she'll cook you up, make you up some latkes. And that's it. I'm serious. There's not one observance that we do to commemorate and thank God for winning that war against the Greeks, which was such a dangerous moment. It could have destroyed the whole Jewish people. Why is that? So these are 2 questions that we have to answer. And I'm going to answer it in the following way. The fight with the Greeks was a soulful issue. In other words, the battle was not over, like I said, by Haman. It was a battle of he just hated the Jewish people, their noses. He couldn't look at us. He hated the Jewish race. He wanted to rid the world of the Jewish race. Thank God he didn't succeed. By the Greeks, it was a very different battle. The Greek rulers and the Greek culture and the Greek people had no problem with Jewish people. Had no problem with Jewish people living in Israel, doing what they do, even having their own culture, even having their own customs, their own holidays, because that's the way the world is. Every people have their dates that they commemorate as a national day of celebration. The Greeks have their days, I'm sure. The Romans had their days. The Egyptians have their days. And the Jews in Israel have their days. The Greeks had no problem with any of that. What the Greeks had a problem was with the neshama, the soul of the Jewish people. They observed the Jewish people in the way the Jewish people observed Judaism. And they quickly realized that there's something about this culture that it differs from any other culture in the world. And that is that the Jewish people were committed to their, let's call it mitzvahs, because that's what we call it, right? Our mitzvahs, in a way that defies logic. It was some super rational commitment to things that are totally beyond the human grasp. Let me give you examples of this. I used this example in the past, so maybe you heard this. I'm going to use examples from our own culture in America. Do you celebrate Thanksgiving? Do you have Thanksgiving dinner? What's the cultural experience of Thanksgiving dinner? You eat salad, you have soup. What's the main staple of the Thanksgiving dinner? Turkey. Fine.
That's actually in our prayers when we say Hodu.
Right.
Tarnabol
Exactly.
Hodu.
So you have turkey. Everyone eats turkey by their Thanksgiving dinner, right? It's an American tradition. It's an American cultural tradition. And everyone does it. I mean, they sell them out, and it's you know, you have all the jokes. The turkey met the chicken. You say, you're right, you know. And that of Shabbos, right? You know, he says, "What you're lucky, the chicken." You're like, "Look, what's going to be with me?" He says, "Yeah, we have every Shabbos with the Jews. They eat up as they have us eating chicken." Anyway, turkey. Someone came over to you. You had people over at your house for turkey dinner this year for Thanksgiving. Yeah. How many people did you have? Let's say 10, 15 people. Let's see. If someone would ask you, Jeffrey, I have a question to ask you. Let me imagine your son would ask you, Dad, or any of you in the, how much turkey do you have to eat on Thanksgiving in order for it to be considered fulfilling the obligation of eating turkey? How would you answer that question?
0.
Yeah, there is none.
What?
There is none. Yeah.
There's none what?
No requirement. Yeah.
You wouldn't answer that. That's not how you would answer it. You would laugh at the question.
Mm-hmm.
The question would be hilarious to you. How much to eat? How much you have to eat? It's a joke. The question doesn't even make sense to anyone. Are you kidding me? How much turkey do you have to eat to be yotzei? The obligation of eating turkey. There's no obligation. There's no nothing. It's a tradition. It's a cultural thing. You know, you want it, have it. You don't want it, you want a tiny piece, have it. You want a drumstick, have it. Whatever you want. The question makes no sense. The Greeks had their traditions. They had the foods that they ate on certain days, just like an American. Everyone has that. Which culture doesn't have these things? When it comes to Jews, it's a whole different experience. If your son asks you on Seder night, when you eat the matzah, tell me, how much matzah do you have to eat for you to fulfill the obligation of eating matzah on Pesach? What are you going to answer him? You're not going to laugh. It's a perfectly legitimate question. You're going to see the question as a serious question, and you're going to say, I'm not a rabbi, so I don't know the answer, but I'll call the rabbi. And there's an answer. You know there's an answer. The question makes sense. The answer makes sense. What's the answer, by the way? An ounce. An ounce. You have to eat an ounce of matzah. What happens if someone ate 9/10 of an ounce? He didn't fulfill the obligation. You didn't do it. You didn't get the mitzvah. You have to do it again. And we don't even laugh when we say this. To us, this makes perfect sense. That man ate a matzah. It was a little smaller than an ounce. He made the blessing. He had it. He thought about the exodus from Egypt when he was having it. He was having the full cultural experience when he ate that matzah. But he didn't eat enough. What is enough? Who said there has to be a certain amount? Like the whole thing. How much wine has to be in your Kiddush cup? Or the 4 cups of wine on Passover. How much does each cup require?
4 cups.
4 cups, but how much does each cup have to have? Each time there's an amount for that too. 2.9 ounces. And we don't laugh when we say this. This makes perfect sense. The cups have to be 2.9 ounces. The matzah has to be 1 ounce. The murr has to be 1 ounce. If the cup at 2.8 ounces, nish good. You got to do it again. And to us, this is very normal. We don't even think there's something strange about the question or the answer. The Greeks saw this as very, very strange. They couldn't wrap their minds, as probably most Americans today. If you told a non-Jewish American, asked him this question, how much do you have to eat turkey on Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I think you're nuts.
I think like he doesn't know what you're talking about. He doesn't understand the question. And when he would walk into our Seder and watch us, they would think we're a little off the wall. In other words, we're particular with little minutiae, little things. It has to be this amount, and you have to eat it in 4 minutes. That ounce has to be eaten in 4 minutes. Also another super rational thing. In other words, where am I going with this? The Greeks realized that a Jewish mitzvah is not a cultural thing. It's a divine experience. They're connecting to something beyond. This is super rational from beginning to end. Because a rational person is not going to get bogged down to 2.8 ounces or 2.9 ounces. No rational person would get bogged down with something so insignificant and something so what we would call silly. But for us, it's not silly at all. This is, you had Pesach or you didn't, is a matter of 1/10 of an ounce. And that, super rational, what does that tell you? What that tells you is that the Jewish people, this is not a cultural experience. Culture doesn't get bogged down with ounces and 1/10 of an ounce and all that nonsense. This is a divine commandment. Whether you understand it, you don't understand it, it's a holy act that Jews connect via these acts to God Almighty Himself. And you ask the Jew, why does it have to be this way? He doesn't have an answer for you. He can't explain it rationally because there is no rational behind it. There's no rationale behind it. It's God's will. God understands it, God's God, but we just know we have to do it. And the funny thing is that it's so natural to us that when we have the discussion, how much matzah, how much wine, how long does it have to be, we don't even think it's funny. It's just a perfectly normal way to do a mitzvah. It's so natural to us that to get bogged down with the minutiae. Now, in a culture that's apathetic, the American walks into us, say he doesn't care. Do what you want. You want to eat in 4 minutes, eat it in 4 minutes. You want to eat in 4 hours, eat it. They don't care. But in Greeks, they did care. Because the Jewish people were a thorn in their, there was a bone in their, we were a thorn in their behind, as they say. They couldn't understand this concept. And because the Greeks so were committed and was so worshipped, the human intelligence, to them, that was the ultimate a person can reach, is perfect, rational mindset. And here the Jews, with whatever they do, there's not one mitzvah that's rational. Almost no mitzvahs are rational. There may be certain rationale to it, but when you get down to the core essence of it, there's no rationale there. Let me give you an example. We're not allowed to murder, right? Everyone can relate to that mitzvah, right? Murder is abhorrent. It's terrible. Why are you not allowed to murder? You ask a Greek, why aren't you allowed to murder? What's he going to tell you? It's abhorrent to murder. You're not allowed to murder. You have no right to take someone else's life. Right? Is that why you're not allowed to murder?
We were told not to do it, so we don't do it.
But there's a reason behind it. You can understand it. It's a very rational mitzvah, right? You would say, is that a rational mitzvah, Arthur?
Yes.
Not allowed to murder. What happens if someone asks you, please murder me? I'm begging you to take my life. I'm begging you. I hate my life. I want you to take it. Would you say, well, maybe that's a little different. You're allowed to help him take his life? Would you say yes or no?
Under the laws of this country, you can't do that.
You can't do that. Assisted suicide, you're not allowed to do.
Correct.
Good, okay. What's the reason?
The reason is can't. You're not in charge of taking someone else's life.
No, but if that person wants to, he's begging you, I'm suffering, I have so much pain, you're not allowed.
Well,
Why
they just
not?
went through that, Rabbi, with the man that went to jail. The one that was
Dr. Kevorkian.
Kevorkian, yeah.
Right.
Kevorkian, right.
So there's a good example.
Yeah. Let me take this a step further. How about if a person is a vegetable?
Redefines the
And the doctors say there's no hope. He's in a coma, he's a vegetable. Pull the plug.
that's legal in this country.
That is legal.
See, I believe in that, Rabbi.
It is legal.
If somebody's a vegetable, take their life.
But is
If the
it
family
kosher?
agrees.
There is no life.
What?
Right.
Is it kosher? Though?
The Torah would consider that as severe as if you took a 25-year-old jogger's life.
Mhm.
Did you know that?
Yes.
Did you know that?
No.
I'm not getting into now when does death begin, at brain death, this, that. I'm not getting into that. I'm talking about where everyone agrees he's not dead yet.
You know what it's like?
Society, one second,
It's
sis.
the old expression, the man's better off dead.
I get that, but that's here's the thing. But here's the thing. Most people would agree with what you're saying on a rational level.
Right.
On a rational level, you're right. But nothing we do is rational. This is a mitzvah. Don't murder. Murder means taking a life. Period. Doesn't make a difference what kind of life it is. It's a healthy life. It's a miserable life. Psychologically miserable, physically miserable, whatever you name, it demands a vegetable, like we're saying. Why continue such misery? Only God knows. But he said, do not take that life. And it becomes a completely abhorrent act. Just as you took a life of someone that is 30 years old, that has all his faculties intact. Now that doesn't make sense. I'm getting the looks from even the people in this room. Imagine the Greeks. And that's my point. There's not even the rational mitzvahs by us. When you go once, below the surface and you get to the core of the mitzvah, it becomes super rational. And that's the Yid. A Yid does a mitzvah because he has a neshama. He has a neshama. He has a soul. The Greeks couldn't wrap their mind around this. And it became a threat to them. Jewish observance in such a way became a major threat to them. Because it defied and it was against everything they believed in. I said yesterday, let me go to the next part of it. When the Greeks saw that the Jews are not letting up and they're stubborn about the way they want to observe mitzvahs, it has to be this way and not the other way. Has to be super rational, not rational. The Greeks said, enough, we're not having this. Because to them, rationale was the most important thing. Super rational was scary to them. It was otherworldly, it was a threat to their whole philosophy, they didn't want it. And they forbade mitzvahs. They said, we're not going to allow you to observe Shabbos, we're not going to allow you to observe circumcision. We're not going to allow you to do these things. And when the Jews didn't stop, they fought. They went to war. And the Jews won the war. And then they come into the temple and they want to light up the menorah. What's the menorah? So 1 second, before we get to the menorah. So it turns out, what was the big battle here? It wasn't a battle of the human body. It was a battle of the human spirit. It was a battle of the soul, not a battle of the body. Haman hated our body. The Greeks hated our soul. So what was the battle? The battle was for the soul. It turned out to be a battle of the body as well later when they went to war. So therefore, now, they come into the temple. And they have to light up the menorah. They ransack the whole temple, the Greeks. And the Jews have to rededicate it, fix it up, put everything in place, and rededicate the temple. How do you rededicate the temple? Well, you bring sacrifices, you do other things, you restore the service in the temple, right? From morning to night, there's different things that are done there. But what part of the temple represents the Jewish spirit most?
The Holy of Holies, the inner chamber.
The inner chamber. I would say something else as well. The inner chamber, there was no service that they did every day in the inner chamber. In the inner chamber, just to explain, was the furthest, the holiest of the holy, right? Which is known as the Kodesh HaKadashim, the Holy of Holies. In there was the ark with the 2 tablets, and that was it. And no one went in there except one person on one day a year, the high priest on Yom Kippur. But on a regular day, no one went in there. The furthest they went in was the second chamber, which was where the menorah was. So what was the most important daily service in the temple that represented the spirit, the soul of the Jewish people? The menorah. It says, Kineir Hashem Nishmat Adam. The candle of God is the soul of man. The candle represents our soul, because it's a fire. What is a fire? A fire is a flame. What is a flame? What's the nature of a flame? It flickers all the time up. It just shakes. It's always in a movement. It's never content. It's always trying to expire, right? To leave the wick and go back to its source, the source of fire which is up above. That's the soul. The soul is never content. It's always in the movement. That's why we shake during davening, right? Because we're like this, like the soul is like a candle. We're always in the movement, right? It's one of the reasons. So in other words, the lighting of the menorah represents the soul. That is the soul of the Jewish people. And what was this battle about? It was about the soul. And that's why when we have to observe and commemorate the miracles that happened during the battle of Chanukah, which one did the rabbis and the sages choose to observe? The menorah, not the battle, the war miracle. Even though the war miracle was more popular and was more known and more, it was more immediate, this was, the rabbis understood one thing. If you allow the menorah to be destroyed and contaminated by the Greeks, let me ask you another question, which will also add some spice to this. What happened? The Greeks went into the temple and they contaminated all the oil, right? When you think about it, if they don't want us to light the menorah, why didn't they just take all the oil and spill it out and destroy it? Why didn't they just get rid of it? That would make sure that would ascertain that we can build.
Or destroy the menorah.
Destroy the menorah, destroy the oil. Why contaminate it? The answer is very simple, because the Greeks didn't care if you lit the menorah. You have a cultural experience in lighting the menorah. It represents your ancestry, something in your history. Go right ahead. Every people, every nation has their observances and their things. But they wanted you to light the menorah with the Greek touch. They wanted it to be with the way we light the menorah, with the way we would observe a cultural experience, which is based on the human rationale, the human. It's not a godly thing. That's why they touched it and they contaminated. They wanted the Jews to light the menorah. They had no problem with Jewish culture. They had a problem with the Jewish religion. Jewish culture, by all means. Jewish religion, absolutely not. Because they knew something about our religion that so many Jews don't even know. That Judaism is a super rational, godly thing.
I think that the word is fear, Rabbi.
What do you mean fear?
The Jewish religion.
They feared it.
Right.
Why did they fear? I'm explaining why. Right. They feared it because it was everything that they were not.
Right.
Their experience ended right here with their rationale. They
could not reach.
They couldn't go
that.
beyond the rationale. And mitzvahs are super rational. So therefore they didn't destroy the menorah's oil, they just touched it, contaminated it. They wanted us to light the menorah, be like us. We also have our cultural experiences and observances, but with a Greek touch. Don't turn it into a godly experience. And that's why the Jews insisted, we're not going to use the Greek, that contaminated oil. Even though I said before, by law, you would be allowed to. You're allowed to use contaminated oil if you don't have any other oil. That's the law. God's law. But the Jews said, in this case, we're not using it. Because this was the whole battle. Was not to. The battle was exactly that. Are we going to use Greek oil or are we going to use Jewish oil? Are we going to have a neshama here or are we just going to have culture? Are we going to have a mitzvah or are we going to just have culture? That was what this battle was all about. So God provided a miracle even though he didn't have to. It wasn't necessary. They could have used the contaminated oil. But God saw such devotion that they're right. In this case, they shouldn't have used, they were right not to use the contaminated oil. So God said, you know what, I'm going to provide them an unnecessary miracle. I'm going to give them that oil, make it last for 8 days till they can produce the new Jewish uncontaminated oil. So what's the lesson of all of this? So I'd like to just share with you another point. And that is, where do we come? What does this tell? What is our story of Chanukah? Well, I gave you some history and some philosophy. But how does it relate to you and me? So I'll take it one step further, something I said yesterday about the Fabrengen. The Greeks, every human being is made up of body and soul, right? Correct?
Mm-hmm.
What is the soul made up of?
Air and fire.
What's that?
Air and fire.
No, the soul I'm talking about. Air and fire? No, I'm talking about the spiritual soul. The spiritual soul is made up of 4 levels.
Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, and there's one more, right?
Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and Chaya. What's that? The part of the soul that is enclosed in our action, or the behavioral aspect of the soul, what we do, how we function. Then there's another level which is Ruach, which is the emotions of the soul, the feelings of the soul, how you feel about what you do. I love, I hate, I despise, and so on. The 3rd level of the soul is our intellect. Correct? How you think, how you perceive, what makes sense to you, what doesn't, and so on. Your rationale. The 4th level is our faith, what we believe. I believe in God. I believe what we believe in, which is the faith aspect of the human experience. And many peoples have faith. The Greeks had these 4 levels within their human soul, as we do. We have those 4 levels. But a Yiddish neshama has a 5th level. A Jewish soul has a 5th level. And I want to talk about the first 4, then I'll get to the 5th. So, the Jews have 4 levels in their soul: their behavior, their feelings, their intellect, and their faith. The Greeks also do, right? They have those 4 levels. The Greeks tried hard to contaminate every aspect of our soul, and they did. Our behavior, they got Jews to behave like Greeks. Our feelings, they got Jews to feel like them, to have feelings and loves that Greeks love. Hellenists, they became Hellenized. Many Jews became Hellenized. They began to think like Greeks. They began to have faith like Greeks. By the way, what's a Greek faith? Greek faith is also rational, by the way. In other words, your mind tells you there's certain things you'll never understand. Your mind knows that there's certain things you can't understand. So the Greek is ready to accept that. So he's ready to accept certain things on faith. Correct? They contaminated our faith. And that's the meaning of they contaminated all the oil in the temple. It means on a spiritual level they were able to crawl up all the way up to the highest level and contaminate all that among the Jews. But there's one thing that they couldn't tamper with, and that is the essence of our neshama, the 5th level. That is the spark of Jewishness that can never become contaminated. What is the story of Chanukah? They found one cruse of oil that was uncontaminated. And the question is, what happened? Why didn't the Greeks contaminate that one? They didn't see it. What was it? Underground? What is the meaning of this? The meaning is that cruse of oil represents spiritually the essence of the neshama that the Greeks, as much as they can try, can never contaminate that. Why? Because they don't have a counterpart. They have a counterpart to our behavior. They also have behavior. They have a counterpart to our ruach, which is our feelings. They have feelings. They have a counterpart to our intellect. They have a counterpart to our faith. They contaminated all that. They were so successful in getting into us. But there's one part of the Jew that they can never contaminate because they don't have a counterpart to that. They don't know what it is. They just have no relation to it. And that's the essence of the neshama. That's the cruse of oil. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's the story of it's the miracle of the Jew. That he always has, no matter what happens to him, he always has a little something, a spark that remains pure. And what do we have to do? We have to take that purity and light it up. And when you light up the menorah with that, your own menorah, it means your own neshama, you light that up, you find that, and you use that oil to light yourself up and give yourself a little, an inspiration from that level. It'll penetrate all the other levels and you'll become a living Jew again. And that the Greeks can never touch. That's the meaning. They found the cruse of oil, which now was not touched by the Greeks. Well, it wasn't touched. Why wasn't it touched? They can't touch it. It could be right there in the open. They won't touch it.
Was it from Hashem?
It's our neshama that we got from God, yes. Yeah. That is the part of the neshama that only we have and no one can touch it. No one can contaminate it. That's what we have to do tonight on Chanukah. Chanukah is, we have to thank Hashem for the great miracle of winning the war against the Greeks, for sure, and we do. In our Amidah prayer, we thank God for that. We have a little prayer for that. But what's the great observance of Chanukah? It's about that fifth level of the neshama. That pure piece, a little bit of oil that remains intact by us, no matter what happens to us. You can fall down to the lowest level spiritually. This can never be tampered with. This always remains intact. And that's what God gave us at Mount Sinai. The great gift of Matan Torah, the great gift of Torah is that we have this level that can never be touched and tampered with. Therefore, never give up on the Jew. It looks like he's totally gone, there's nothing there, it's over. He's so stubborn and he's so distant, he's lost touch and he doesn't have anything left in him as far as Jewishness. You're making a mistake.
That's like a miracle, Rabbi.
That is a miracle.
When you think about it.
Yeah.
And to me, another miracle is if you've been to Israel, to see Israel, to me, that's a miracle. Really.
You're right.
When you get off the plane and you look around, you think about 70 years of what they've accomplished. That's a miracle to me.
I agree with you. But where did that come from? Where do you think that resolve comes? That resolve to do all this and to fight and to make it happen. It's the end. It's the fifth level. That's the essence of the neshama.
That we're still here today.
It's a promise.
Everything said and done.
That's a God promise. That's the promise that God made with Abraham, that his descendants will forever be here. You know why? Because that fifth level of the soul is a spark of God. As long as God is here, we're going to be here. And I don't think God's going anywhere. What?
The word priest.
Priest.
Why?
The Kohen. That's how you translate the word Kohen.
Well, when did they switch the word priest to rabbi?
Rabbi has nothing to do with priest.
The Kohanim
It's a family. It's a genetic thing.
Yeah,
It's a family. It's a line from Aaron, the high priest, and anyone that comes from his line is a priest. Barry is a priest.
Okay.
The Kohen, anyone that's a Kohen. They were designated to serve in the temple.
And then there was the high priest, the one.
Right. And that's the promise that God made to Abraham. And therefore the Jewish people will always be here. They're never going to disappear because there's a spark of God within us. And as long as God's here, we're going to be here. And like I said, I don't think God's planning to disappear anytime soon. So we're an eternal people. The Greeks came and went. The Romans came and went. Everyone comes and goes. They have their 15 minutes of fame and then they're gone. The Jewish people are just never off the front pages of their newspapers. They're always there because God's always here. We're God's representatives here in the world. And that was the battle of the Greeks. They couldn't stand that idea. You can be a cultural people like everyone else. When you start asking me how much turkey you have to eat on Thanksgiving, now you're already off the wall. And we do that all with every single mitzvah that we have. We ask how much, what's the requirement, what's the minimum, what's the we have a minimum and a requirement and a super rational, a super rational part of every mitzvah. And people that are rational, it drives them crazy. And that's one of the proofs that we have in the Shema, is this insistence, this incredible, when you think about it. How do we know that a Yid has a neshama? There's many ways we know it, because we don't see the neshama. This is one of the ways. When a Yid gets so bogged down with the minutiae of mitzvahs to the nth degree, there's something there. That's a proof that there's a neshama. Anyway, I don't want to get into that right now. But the point is, that's why we celebrate Chanukah the way we do. So while we thank God for the miracle of the war, ultimately we recognize that this was not about a battle of a warfare of conquering land. This was not what this was about. This was about conquering the neshama, the soul of the Jewish people. So tonight when you gather your family around the menorah, mention this. Talk about this a little bit. That this is a fight against the neshama, the soul, the fifth level of the neshama. When that part of Greek can't touch it, they cannot touch that because they don't have access to it. They don't have that level. So they don't talk that language. They don't have the language. They're not wired to that.
They can't tune
level.
in.
They can't tune into that, so that it's off limits to them.
Yeah. So
That's the miracle of the Jewish people.
The Greeks were not fear of him, of us. They're more jealous of.
I'm not sure it's jealousy. I think it's more fear. In other words, we represented something that was antithetical to everything they stood for. They worshipped the body. They worshipped the human intelligence. To them, higher education was the ultimate.
Yeah.
But when a Jew says, "I want to go one step beyond that," they couldn't. To them, it was what? You're different. We were different.
People fear what they can't understand.
What?
People fear what they can't
Right,
understand.
and we don't fear that which we can't understand. If anything, when it makes too much sense, we get uncomfortable. we like to climb into the super rational. We're naturally inclined to that. I'm telling you, when you think about it, open up any Gemara, a Talmud, on any page of the Talmud, you see what the rabbis are arguing about. You can't believe it. The whole thing, from beginning to end, is a super rational religion. It almost does away with the rationale. Although with the people of the book, we're a contradiction, really, when you think about it. On the one hand, we're the ultimate in trying to understand and to probe and to dig deeper and to go. But then once we get there, we will go one more step to the super rational. So we maximize our rationale and then we go beyond. We go one step beyond the Greeks were able to go. The Greeks represent the world. They represent the nations of the world. It's not only the Greeks. It's probably true with many others. But they they fought this. They fought this. They really, really fought this. And we won, as we always do, because God's on our side. And therefore, when it comes tonight, it's not about making sense of what we do. It's about accepting that this is the will of God. And if you can make sense of it as much as you can, great, and you should. But then you realize that ultimately it's God's will, and God is way beyond our intelligence and our understanding, and therefore we submit to Him. Greeks could not submit. If it didn't make sense to me, don't bother me with it. There's no submitting. A Yid puts himself flat, puts himself, I'm not important. What do you want, God? So have a happy Chanukah, everyone, and enjoy your candle lighting. And it should be meaningful to us. When you light the menorah, there's a story that these candles tell. there's a theme, there's a message that these candles convey, and that is this extraordinary element of the Jewish neshama that is unique, and is not just unique, but is the most important part of our neshama. That's what directs and gives life to the other four levels. So even when we do think and we do rationalize, it's all based on something beyond, and therefore it's perfect. Okay? Have a happy Chanukah, everyone. Enjoy. We'll see you all tonight at 5:30 at Town Center. We got good word from the weather forecasters in heaven that it's going to be good.